testimony. Ms. Stefanik, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I represent a number of higher education institutions in northern New York, ranging from SUNY schools to community college to private colleges, and I visited every single one of them. And one of the conversations that I frequently have with students is that student aid programs are complex and challenging for them to understand. And my question is for Mr. Runcie. One of the statutory purposes of the federal student aid PBO is to make aid programs more understandable for students and their families. However, just last month, GAO released a report that found many eligible borrowers aren't even aware of income-driven repayment plans and therefore aren't able to make the decision to lower their payments and reduce the risk of defaulting on their loans. How are you addressing this failure, and how are you educating servicers to make sure they can accurately explain this maze of repayment options to borrowers so they can access the help they need to repay these loans?
Yes, I mean, part of it is the overall complexity of the student loan program. So there's a lot of statutory programs, certain things that we don't have control over, so it makes it much more difficult to make a decision about what the right repayment plan is. In terms of income-driven repayment, we put out a targeted campaign that yielded pretty impressive results. We are doing another targeted campaign once we come out with Repay. Repay is an income-driven program that's going to expand the available universe of people that can participate in income-based repayment by another 5 million. So on the heels of that, we're going to make sure that we send out a targeted email campaign. We've worked with other parties, as I mentioned before, Treasury in terms of the income tax process. We've worked with Intuit in the past. So we're going to leverage partners in our own infrastructure and the servicers as well, because as I mentioned before, we changed the pricing model there. So there are lots of things that we have done and that we plan to do, but I think what's most important is that since we started taking these actions, you can see the significant increase in the adoption of income-based repayment. So while there may be some folks that aren't aware, our hope is as we continue to roll out our communications plan and our information, we will shrink the universe of people who aren't aware, but I think we're continuing to push on that on that front, and we've made some tremendous, I think, progress.
Well, I agree with you. Students have to be made aware of this, and this is a generational crisis that we are facing here with historic amount of student debt. And as a millennial myself, this is pushing off our next generation of leaders from buying their first home, from being able to save for the future. So I suggest we fix this program so that our young people are able to make good decisions and not default on their student loans. My next question is for Mr. Drager. In your testimony, you talked about the importance of accountability, and the lack of accountability, which is a key part of a PBO, tremendously erodes the goodwill between institutions and FSA, and you referenced reporting requirements. Besides the gainful employment reporting disaster that you referenced in your testimony, have there been other instances where unclear guidance or poor communication made it challenging for schools to do their jobs?
There have been several examples where schools have tried to seek guidance from the Department of Education as deadlines loomed, whether it's with reporting requirements dealing with subsidized Stafford loan limitations, which went into effect in the last year. The interesting, I'm also dealing in facts. We have 20% of our schools have reported operational shortfalls. That's a real number, 20% representing 6.5 million students where they cannot do their jobs because of the operational shortfalls that I've cited in my testimony. The accountability thing, to me, is most acute when you look at the department's last annual report, where they acknowledge that they failed to achieve 2 out of 13 of their strategic objectives, dealing with customer service to schools, customer service to students. But then in the very next paragraph, they detailed those failures as successes. They said, quote, "Given the volume of new requirements over the past year, the small reduction in these scores on this metric is an indication of the success of FSA's outreach and support efforts. The problem with self-assessment is even when the department fails, they deem it a success."
Thank you. I yield back.